Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. So now we've seen quite a few witnesses in this trial against Tammy Moore. I want to bring in our guest, John Phillips. He's a criminal defense attorney here with us to talk a little bit about the prosecution's case thus far. Good afternoon, John.
Good afternoon.
So I want to ask you, so far the prosecution has methodically laid out these witnesses. We heard from the officer about the payphone and the investigation with respect to the payphone. Then we heard about the GPS tracking. Now we're hearing about the video. All important testimony, but a little bit boring. What do you do on either side to make this a little bit more compelling for the jury?
You know, when you're putting the links together in a chain of circumstantial evidence, this is a case where you don't have a murder weapon, you don't have a body, and yet you've got to link all these lay witnesses and expert witnesses and police witnesses together. You just got to try to modulate and keep the juries interested. I always look at them and kind of try to, have a nice smile. Hey,
yeah, right.
Turn number 6. I know it's bad, but it's really important. I need you to listen to this point. And some judges, they'll do that too, but it just can't drone on monotone because you will lose them.
Well, you bring up a really good and important point, and something that I've actually studied a little bit, and that's tone of voice. If you can try to sort of change your tone of voice or have someone with a different tone of voice talk as well, it definitely has a tendency to keep the jury a little bit more engaged. Another thing I commented on a little earlier that I want to get your opinion on is using the exhibits. So using the blow-ups, getting the witness down off the stand. Do you find that to be a good way to keep the jury sort of interested and engaged?
You do. Anything that's going to change the sights and sounds of the monotony. And one of the hardest skills for a trial lawyer to learn, like when we're training lawyers, as second chairs, we bring them in and they're so nervous they just want to ask the questions without messing up the questions or forgetting a question. Yeah. And then phase 2 is kind of changing from aggressive and a cross-examination and endearing on somebody you really want the jury to listen, and modulation, as you're saying, a voice. And then we call it the professorial role, when an expert gets down, with the whole patches on the sport coat kind of thing, and gets down there and uses exhibits, because a week-long, 10-day, 2-week, month-long trials, the longer the trial, the more they phase out, and they're going to phase out.
Right.
Sometimes you're just trying the case for the appellate record, or for the judge, for the transcript, but generally you got to make sure your high points that they're listening to.
Yeah, and we're gonna have some more high points as we go through the afternoon. But right now we're going to take a quick break and talk to our host Aaron Keller as he tells us a little bit of what's to come this afternoon on the Daily Debrief.
Heather, good to
Aaron,
see you
welcome.
from the newsroom. Okay, let's talk about what's up on the Daily Debrief starting at 5 o'clock Eastern Time. We're going to break down the case of Michael Flynn, former advisor to President Trump, national security advisor. He was supposed to be sentenced today on charges that he lied about contacts with the ambassador to Russia. That hit a snag. The judge put off the sentencing. We will break down why that happened. Plus, the attorney for Brian Winchester, of course, the key witness in the Denise Williams so-called love triangle murder case from Florida. He joined us on the Law and Crime Network this afternoon to defend that sweetheart deal that key witness received in return for pointing the finger back at Denise Williams. Also, we have 2 cases involving educators and alleged criminal conduct. That's coming up on the Daily Debrief at 5 o'clock Eastern.
Sounds like quite an episode nobody wants to miss, Aaron. I know I'll be watching. Thanks so much. All right, we're going to take you to a quick break, and then we'll be back with more on the Tammy Moore case. Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We are continuing to cover the trial against Tammy Moore. And this particular witness is someone who worked with the victim, Heather Elvis. This is Dennis Hart, and you'll hear him testify about some of the conversations that he had with Heather Elvis and some of the conversations he had with the defendants. Let's take a listen.
Now, during the time she worked at Tilted Kill, Heather ever had any problems, to your knowledge, with anybody as far as getting along with them or fighting or there being any sort of animosity?
No.
And how would you describe how she reacted to Tammy Moore?
She acted very scared and concerned.
And was she ever scared of Sydney Moore?
Your Honor, I'm going to object to speculation of someone's statement. All right, so start.
Now, during the time that Sydney worked at Tilted Kill, how many phones did you see on him?
I believe it's just one. And it's hard. There's no senior on my name. There's no junior on his name.
Okay, but he also worked at a restaurant.
Yes, he was a busser.
He worked at Tilted Kill.
Yes.
Okay. You said that they had a personal relationship.
I know they were talking at one point.
When you say talking, that's an amorous, romantic.
You'd have to ask him.
Okay. So it wouldn't surprise you if there were texts between them of a romantic nature.
No, not at all. They were young.
Did you ever date any employees of Tilted Kill?
No.
Do you know if your son did, other than the missing one?
You'd have to ask him.
Okay, but you're not aware of it?
Not to my knowledge.
Okay. You testified that the missing woman, she was there about as long as you did, right?
Yes, sir.
And she was a hostess.
Yes, sir.
And you said she was a good employee.
Yes, sir.
And that you weren't going to fire her.
No.
Do you consider people that have sex at work to be good employees?
That wasn't my call. Her immediate manager had a conversation with her, and they took care of that on that end. My end was the kitchen and making sure those employees, so I kind of stayed out of it.
But do you consider people that have sex at work to be good employees?
No.
Okay. Do you think someone should be fired for that?
I would say yes.
Well, that's some interesting testimony about sex at work and whether or not they're good employees. John, what do you think? Do you have any attorneys having sex at work, and do you consider them to be good employees?
I mean, in some areas of Nevada, I think you can legally have sex at work.
Good
but
point.
in South Carolina, not so much. And there were a couple of those I would have put an objection in, because you're getting into collateral issues, and just to make the jury not like the witness, what does it have to do with the case necessarily?
Absolutely.
But
yeah, you wonder, that sometimes lawyers just miss objections, but sometimes they make a strategic call not to object. And that might have been such a call, don't you think? Perhaps because that lawyer sort of looked like a jerk by asking that question over and over again. Do you think that was a strategic decision?
Sometimes you just add emphasis to a point that, you can look at the jury and say, okay, are they writing this down? Are they really, upset that she was, instead of sexting, sexting at work? And you make a judgment call. We have the benefit of hindsighting this case and knowing, that they didn't focus on this.
Yeah, and hindsight's always 20/20. I always feel for these lawyers. We're going to take it to another clip. This is Jill Domagauer. She is one of the investigators on this case, and we will play this clip for you and then come back to discuss.
Would it surprise me? Okay.
So it wouldn't surprise you?
I don't know.
Okay. This Brianna was the other person that lived there. Are you aware?
I was told what room was Bree's room, so I would assume she lived there.
Do you know how old she was?
No.
Do you know how old the missing woman was at that time?
I can't recall. I think they both were in their 20s.
Would it be fair to say that the missing woman was 20 years old at that time?
I honestly cannot remember. I'm sorry.
Okay. approach him?
Yes.
Free to approach throughout this process, I think. Investigator Don Gower, using state 62. This is a picture you took?
Yes, sir, it is.
This is the kitchen front area as you walk into the front hallway.
Kind of like that hallway I was standing in going into the, yes, sir.
This is a fast food bag on the counter.
Yes, sir, it is.
McDonald's.
Yes.
So you found some McDonald's, right?
Yes, sir.
Found some pizza boxes.
Yes, sir.
Those pizza boxes specifically were in the bathroom that you believe was the missing woman's bathroom in her room.
Yes, sir.
In these pictures that you took, say 68, this is in the living room, right?
Yes, sir.
Kind of looks like a wet bar.
Yes, sir.
Could be classified as that.
I called it a vanity, but
Also where they do some makeup.
yeah. Yes, sir.
Majority of the space on the countertop is taken up by what are those?
Bottles.
Bottles of
It appears to be alcohol and other drinks.
alcohol. That's a lot of bottles.
And there you have the testimony of another investigator. And John, I want to bring in John Phillips, criminal defense attorney. John, you know, investigators like that, they're quite accustomed to being cross-examined. Things don't seem to really shake them. Is that your experience as well?
It is. They're used to this. And in most jurisdictions, they're used to that specific prosecutor.
Right.
And, you know, small towns, they kind of know what's going to be coming at them, or defense attorney in this case, obviously. So it's, you know, that's a lot of alcohol, isn't it, man? Yeah. Just get through the hard parts and get back, steer it back to the relevant.
Yeah, and you make a very good point that sometimes I think that juries and lay people don't always remember that these people deal with each other over and over again. So that investigator has been examined by the prosecutor many times before. She's been examined by this defense attorney most likely many times before. And oftentimes they even have collegial relationships once she steps down off the stand. You sort of are able to separate the two when you get ready to be cross-examined or when you get ready to do the cross-examining.
Right, exactly. We do personal injury work as well, and I was at a party this weekend where a adjuster from State Farm was there, and she didn't want to take a picture that I was in. But you know, when the camera wasn't there, we were as collegial as anything, and that's the nature of the business. I mean, certainly we have attorneys on the other side that we don't prefer to be around, and cops we know that may not be as honest as other cops and witnesses generally, but you particularly with the people that testify a lot, you not only know them from firsthand experience, but you have other depositions and other people's intake through message boards and listservs that you can feed upon.
Right. We're like boxers in a ring. We will be right back, ladies and gentlemen. We're going to take a quick break, and then we'll continue with some clips from this Tammy Moore case. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I want to talk to our guest, John Phillips, criminal defense attorney, about this testimony. You know, you mentioned this a little bit earlier, John, and I think it's worth repeating. This is a small town. And when you hear these witnesses talk about these places, it's pretty clear that there's an assumption that everyone in the room knows this town and knows these streets and knows these bars. How much does that impact the way that you try a case when you know everyone is really familiar and maybe even with one another?
It is, you know. It depends on how small the town is. We've traveled our road show to like tiny little towns where I was the only outsider, and then we get to try them in towns where we're from, and it does make a difference. How you set up your delivery, so to speak, really depends on how well the jurors know the area, and you do some of that in voir dire and jury selection. You kind of figure this stuff out. But, you know, the interesting thing about this trial is this is a small town situation, but also a small town situation where all the witnesses and lawyers know there are cameras in the courtroom. Yeah. And that they know they're going out to the world, too. And that there is a secondary consideration there.
Yeah, and you bring up an interesting point. I mean, I am a huge fan of cameras in the courtroom. I think that it's important for us here at Law and Crime, but also, you know, even the Supreme Court, I think that there are courts and they should be open to the public. But it does sometimes, at least at the beginning, change the approach of the case. When you have a witness, and we got to do it this with that quick answer here, but how do you direct a witness when there's a camera in the courtroom? Do you tell them to just ignore it?
You do. You completely have the witnesses, you know, act as if the camera's not there. The lawyers need to know they're there. Right. I've got just a case we tried this year.
Yeah, you know what? I'm going to have to come back to your story there, John. We're going to go to a quick break, ladies and gentlemen, and we'll come back with more of this compelling case. Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Heather Hansen, and we are continuing to cover this really interesting case against Tammy Moore, who is accused of kidnapping Heather Elvis. Now, we've been watching throughout this afternoon some of the officers doing some investigation, the GPS, the phone records. But now, ladies and gentlemen, we are getting to the good stuff. You will see in this next clip, the officer who is testifying is Officer Will Lynch. Now, you might think, big deal, another officer, but this officer is going to be talking about the text messages that Tammy Moore had on her phone. So let's take a look and a listen, and we'll be back to discuss with John Phillips.
And when you looked at the contents of Tammy's phone, could you tell whether or not she was seeing those messages between Heather's phone and Sydney's phone?
There was a particular incident, I believe on November 5th, where there was a text message that came in from Heather's phone to Sydney's phone, and looking at Tammy's phone at the exact same time, Tammy is communicating with a friend of hers, I believe, or it could be a relative, that she is actually seeing this text and commenting on this particular text that came into Sydney's cell phone.
Okay. And do you see the discussions on Tammy's phone from November and December?
I do.
And do you see the messages about Heather Elvis?
Yes.
And do you see messages where she's talking about her relationship with Sydney?
What is it?
On Tammy's phone. Do you see messages on Tammy's phone where she's talking about her and Sydney on the phone?
And when was this?
Between November and December.
Just early on in November. There's
Okay.
some, yes.
Okay. And when she's on Sydney's phone, do you see her talking about Heather Elvis?
Yes.
Okay. Now, did you create a summary of the timeline showing these text messages that you just testified about?
There is a summary, I believe, yes.
Okay. And did you do that for Sydney's phone as well as Tammy's phone?
Yes.
And would you recognize it if I showed it to you?
Sure.
I'm showing you now States Exhibit 113 and 114. Do you recognize what I'm showing you?
Yeah, these are excerpts from each of the timelines, Tammy and Sydney's timelines.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, so we're starting to get to the fun stuff in the trial. And John, I want to bring you in really quickly. The energy in the room sometimes changes when you have a witness who the jury's been waiting for, doesn't it?
It does. And, you know, they're sensing, here comes the love triangle stuff. Here comes something good.
Right.
And you see people start leaning forward.
Yeah, and we know our audience at home is leaning forward as well, so we're going to take you right back to see some more of these text messages, and then a little bit later, perhaps the defendant will testify herself, and we'll see about that. But for right now, let's take a look at some more of this text message testimony.
And then Tammy says, there's a way to research it somehow. There has to be.
Okay. And are there more messages after that on her phone in early November?
Yes.
And tell us about those messages.
So this would be on 11/5. It's showing 6:06. It's actually going to be 1:06 p.m. She would subtract 5 hours. So at 1:06 p.m., Tammy sends a text message that says, just got a period from the little cunt. It's trying to communicate. And then this person that she had communicated with earlier says, what'd she say? Tammy puts the symbol for a period. And then Tammy says, she's trying to start a conversation. This person says, with you or Sydney? Tammy says, that phone number. Tammy then says, I didn't respond. And Tammy says, not sure what's in that twisted mind.
Are there any other messages?
There are.
And tell the story about those.
There's.
I object to reading this into the record. There's inflection added from this witness that we can't get from these messages, and therefore they're inferring and giving messages from just simple text and words that we don't know if were given by the user or who used them.
All right. You can address that on the calls.
Thank you.
Thank you, Judge. And these are all early November?
Yes, that's correct.
And now we're on November 6th?
That's correct.
And tell me about the contents on November 6th.
Okay, this would be November 6th, approximately 12:32 in the morning. Tammy says, your dad is an evil, twisted freak, and I'm being punished for it. Don't say anything. Then this person that she had spoken with later on says, we are walking around Broadway. Josh wants to have a drink, a tilted kilt. Tammy says, you tell him. Tammy says, please don't. Tammy says, take pics. Then there is a message from Christine Johnson saying, really? And then there's a text message from Tammy to Christine, yep, Southern bullshit. Tammy sends another message to Christine, crown with a splash of cranberry. There's another message to Christine, I'm bored. And then there's another text message after that that's uncategorized. It said, had to settle for Southern comfort, ick. Then there's another message to Christine Johnson, yeah, babe, they hate him too. There's another message from Tammy to Christine Johnson, they know daddy ducked up our lives. There's another message to Christine after that. It says, they know what I have to do. And then there's an incoming message from Christine says, and I mean that. Then there's an outgoing text message from Tammy to Christine. Now he had to stay chained to the bed until further notice while I live my life as a single woman. It's all good. And then there's another message from Tammy to Christine after that. Have hope that things will be okay after I enjoy my single year.
And were those messages deleted?
Yes, they were.
Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. I'm Heather Hansen, and that was an officer reading the text messages between the defendant, Tammy Moore, and one of her friends. I want to bring in our guest, John Phillips, a criminal defense attorney. And John, I want to ask you, by reading in those text messages, it's almost as if the prosecution is forcing Tammy Moore to testify. What do you think?
She is, and we saw some of that with George Zimmerman. They were kind of baiting, and it works. You've got to have somebody that has to defend themselves and waive their Fifth Amendment.
Yeah, you make a very good point because, these text messages were testifying. And I immediately thought of the George Zimmerman case as well, because all of those interviews that he gave with the different officers that were videotaped, the jury got to see him. And in that case, it was actually, to the benefit of the defense. But they got to see him speak and explain himself. And so they didn't have to call him in that case because they liked what was said. But here, you've got Tammy Moore not coming across so likable, not coming across so well. Do you think that leaned them in the direction, and when I say them, it's two different considerations, right? It's the witness herself, Tammy, and whether or not she wants to testify, and then it's also the lawyers. Let's start with the lawyers. After these text messages are played, are you leaning towards putting your witness on the stand?
Oh, as the defense attorney, your client and generally how well she presents and what kind of case she conveys she has, whether they know she did it or not. The prosecution sets you up in a no-win situation almost with this case because they have negative stuff. They have you, angry. They have you right where they want you. And are you going to get in and be able to rehabilitate that? That's the catch-22.
Yeah, it's a tough, as you said, it's a tough decision. And in this case, this is my personal opinion, I think that the client herself, I think Tammy herself may have wanted to testify. And oftentimes, do you see situations where a client that you may want to keep as far away from that stand as you can is pretty insistent upon taking the stand and telling their story?
That's most of our criminal defense cases. Everybody thinks they can talk that jury, into reasonable doubt. And we're like, look, you have reasonable doubt by not answering. Right. It totally depends on the case. And another real interesting point about that segment was about inflection. Mm-hmm. And the officer did inflect in the beginning. I thought that was, a good call by the defense attorney to stop him from doing that. I've actually had rehearsal, because reading depositions in is one of the most boring things in a trial. For sure. And I usually try to find an entertaining reader and emphasize the points I want them to make. No, it's to object. It's a good point. You can do that with depths a little bit more easily with text messages. That particular witness got cut off from doing that. When we come back, ladies and gentlemen, we're going to see whether or not Tammy Moore took the stand in her own defense and how well that worked out for her. So we'll be right back.
And it's out here on North Main Street in Conway, right?
Yes.
Okay. And you were there for some period of time, and then you decided you were going to leave, right?
They got really mean with us.
I'm not saying.
And I was ready to go.
I know what it's like.
Yeah.
So, at some point, you determined that you were going to leave, correct?
Yes.
And the police did not stop you from leaving, right?
They tried to.
Well, but they let you
eventually, yes.
All right. And when you left, did Sydney go with you?
No, they would not allow him to leave.
All right. And then, did you go back to your house?
I drove back to the house and went inside my mom and dad's house because I saw police cars out by the stop sign like in front of their home. And my mom and dad had no idea about anything, so I went in to try and let them know, but the police knocked on the door before I could even talk to them.
And in terms of time frame,
all right, that was the first of Tammy Moore. I want to bring in John Phillips. John, what do you think? Is she a good witness? How's she doing?
Yeah, she's that whole cursing thing. When you have somebody that generally doesn't make a bad witness, you want them to kind of lighten some of the worst stuff. Or to do.
Yeah, she definitely, I'm losing my voice here. Sorry about that. She definitely needed a little bit more prep. Do you think she's preppable?
This is the first time I'm seeing her, so I'm new to her testimony as well. And the main thing sticking out here is kind of the back and forth hearsay. She wants to get some of this stuff in, and her defense attorney wants her to get some of this stuff in, but they're playing chess with the prosecutor. So, so far it's kind of mild. She's 5 or 6 out of 10. It's interesting.
Let's see how she does. 5 or 6 out of 10. Let's see if she improves. We're going to take you right back to a clip.
Was Sydney forced to get that tattoo?
No.
Was he forced by you to get that tattoo in retaliation for having an affair with Heather Elvis?
No, I don't think he knew Heather Elvis at all in 2012, January.
So, did the tattoo being applied to his abdomen with your name on it, and that it's not another, I'm not going to leave. Is there another Tammy that you think that would refer to?
No.
Right. So did that tattoo and the application of that tattoo on your husband's abdomen in 2012 have anything whatsoever to do with Heather Elvis.
It did not.
But that tattoo that was taken or applied in 2012 have anything to do with this case?
Does not.
Welcome back to the Law and Crime Network. Before I had a little meltdown, John and I were talking about Tammy's testimony. And John, you made a really good point that both Tammy and her attorney were trying to sort of work their way around this hearsay objection. When you're preparing a witness and anticipating some of the testimony or some of the things that you want to get in could be objectionable, how do you help a layperson understand that and understand how to try to avoid it?
I mean, sometimes you just explain the simple rule that if it's coming from somebody else, you can't talk about it.
Right.
But other times, I don't necessarily look. The judge wants you to prepare witnesses. They don't want a problematic witness. But sometimes I just don't bring it up until it's a problem, because I'm better on my feet than trusting a witness to say things, because sometimes they'll avoid things that might not be hearsay.
Right.
And so I try to deal with things more on my feet. But this attorney's doing a good job, kind of strategically dealing with all of the major issues he thinks that the jury might about.
Yeah, I mean, there's definitely some balance there. And hearsay tends to be the area that's hardest in law school. It's hardest for lawyers. And it's often, you have no choice with hearsay. One of the things that I'm sure you heard in law school and in practice, and I've heard it as well, is you know it when you hear it. And so if lawyers barely know it when they hear it, you can't really expect witnesses to be attuned to it. And so one of the jobs of a lawyer, and not an easy one, is to be asking the questions and at the same time sort of thinking through how that hearsay evidence is going to go.
Because there's exceptions,
right?
And then there's things that are not by definition hearsay.
Yeah. And
so there are, it's a complicated analysis that trial lawyers tend to have as a part of their system. I don't know that I paid that much attention in evidence class as you do, after going through a few trials. I'm like, oh, yeah. I need to know this better than I know anything.
Yep, hearsay is the thing to know. Well, ladies and gentlemen, we'll come back and see whether or not the defense is able to get over that hearsay testimony as we listen to more of Tammy Moore's testimony when we come right back. All right, ladies and gentlemen, well, it's easy enough to be examined on direct examination, but when it comes time for cross-examination, that's when the stakes get a little bit higher. So we're going to take you right back to the courtroom where Tammy Moore is being cross-examined.
Miss Moore, do you know who I am?
I do.
Okay, and who am I?
Nancy Webster. You've made my life miserable. Am I allowed to ask you a question? No. Okay. Sorry. Okay.
And I noticed you mentioned some other people by first and last name. Alan Large, Jessica,
yes.
You know all those people?
Yes.
Okay. You got those names on a list somewhere?
Well, those were the two that arrested us in the beginning, so that's why I remember them.
Well, do you have our name on a list somewhere?
I've seen you in the court trials against my husband.
Have you sent your sister up here to take any pictures of me?
No.
Okay. Let's see, I just wanted to ask you first, you would agree with me that Sydney's phone number is 3175, correct?
Yes.
And your phone number ends in 3174, correct?
Correct.
And you had access to both phones, is that correct?
We've always had access to one another's phones. Even till y'all took him away, we still did, yes.
But so you did have access to both phones?
And he did too?
Okay.
Yes.
And you would agree that you were driving a black Ford 150?
That was our family car, yes.
Okay. And so there was only one vehicle?
One vehicle.
So if Sydney got up and went somewhere and you wanted to go, y'all would have to ride together, is that correct?
if I wanted to go somewhere, he almost always drove. I think I drove that car 3 times total.
Okay. But it was your car, too?
It was in both of our names.
Okay, so you would agree that you could drive it?
Of course.
Okay, and you drove it on 1220?
On the way back from the police station, I did.
Okay. Now, you do know who Heather Elvis is, correct?
I do. She's a very pretty girl.
Okay. And just so we're on the same page, this is her?
Yes, it is.
Okay. And is this the way you saw her?
I've never seen her. That's a picture, yes.
Your sister testified earlier that y'all looked her up on Facebook.
Sydney showed me who she was on Facebook.
And you were asking your sister to take a picture, correct?
I don't recall that. But you said it's in our text messages, and I may have.
Well, you've seen the discovery.
Yes, so I'm telling you I may have, yes.
Okay. So you would admit you did ask your sister to take.
All right, I want to bring in John Phillips, the criminal defense attorney. John, no love lost between this witness and this prosecutor, is there?
You got me champing at the bit now. It's there's no love lost, and she knows she can't ask the prosecutor a question.
Right.
And to say you made my life miserable, she thinks she's going to get points with that. And it just doesn't work that way. If somebody's sleeping with your husband, you might look them up on Facebook. Like, no, she was probably on her page every day. And so I'm down from a 5 to 6 to 3 or 4. And I have a feeling I'm going to have negative points real soon.
Yeah, I mean, we're just getting into it. But to your point, I mean, asking the questions. And it's funny, I think you're 100% right. She thinks she's making points with the jury with this, and that they'll have the same antagonism towards the prosecutor that she does. But that's a bad bet, no matter who you're asking.
It is. And you can see her kind of look at him and smile, and it just drips of insincerity.
Yeah, and I would, we don't get to see the jurors, but I'm sure that every attorney in that room is keeping an eye on the jury box to see what their reaction is to this witness. Now, if you're defense counsel, are you trying to direct her against this type of behavior and say, the jury, as much as you can, direct someone against their regular personality?
He seems like he knows what he's doing, but at some point, when you have somebody that just thinks they know better than you, and the judge will usually ask, like, what you're doing if you go testify,
right?
Like, all right, I'm going. Is there right? It's frustrating. I have a tad of empathy for this defense lawyer, but she's clearly, if she got instruction, she's not paying attention. She came in wanting to talk about hearsay,
right,
wanting to push the limits, wanting to pick on the prosecutor. And when you've been accused of kind of stalking and kidnapping and
right,
obstruction, it's not a good math there.
Not a good look. People are who they are, and they remain that person when they go on the stand. We're going to take a quick break, and when we come back, some more cross-examination with Tammy Moore. And there you go, ladies and gentlemen. The prosecution's very structured, very factual, very impassionate closing arguments, getting out all the facts that she needed to get out. And now we're going to hear from the defense in that closing argument, a little longer clip for you so that you can get the gist of what it is that the defense is trying to argue to save Tammy Moore from jail.
Because we told you we went to Walmart. Oh, then you went and made a phone call from a payphone. You did that. Well, did he? Did he? What have they proved? They got a grainy video of somebody walking to a payphone. We don't know. Walking to a payphone, getting on the phone, and talking about 4 or 5 minutes. And Ms. Livesay would have you believe that it was part of some grand plan, which doesn't fit together at all. Okay? Think about it just a minute. If this lady right here, who's been under the cloud of these charges for 4 years, under suspension 4 years and 10 months. If that lady was who they say she is, and I submit they don't know her. They don't know her like I do. If it's a plan, and Sydney's going to go use the payphone to make a call to lure her out, then what? Don't you think she'd be standing there in the video listening? Because we pretty much know that whatever else happened, Sydney Moore had feelings for this young woman. I don't know if he loved her, okay? There's no evidence that he didn't like her. So if you take the state's theory, and then she's the one going to cuff him to the bed, which you can't do, and that never happened, okay? Now what? What's going to keep him from calling her and saying, hey, I don't know what's going on. My wife's gone crazy. My wife's gone crazy. We're due.
So now we have the prosecution's closing, the defense closing, and what's left but the verdict. So ladies and gentlemen, now you will see what this jury decided with respect to this kidnapping case against Tammy Moore. Let's take a look.
We, the jury, find the defendant, Tammy Kaysen Moore, guilty of kidnapping. We, the jury, find the defendant, Tammy Kaysen Moore, guilty of conspiracy to kidnap.
And that is it, ladies and gentlemen. She was found guilty of both kidnapping and conspiracy. Now, John, I want to bring you in because, you know, before the show, I was talking to my producers about this case. Sydney Moore, her husband, who the conspiracy would have been with, his case against him for kidnapping and conspiracy ended in a mistrial. What do you attribute that to? What's the difference in these cases? How does that happen?
So I haven't listened to his whole trial.
Right.
But the state, you could try this case 10 times, and I think you would get some hung jurors in her case, even with the damage she did to herself. But it's because it's a tough case.
Yeah.
It's a circumstantial case. You're kind of piecing things together that might make sense as a kidnapping and potentially murder case. But it's having a lot of random puzzle pieces fit together, but it makes sense. The verdict makes sense.
Yeah, I wondered, and my brilliant producer brought this up, not I, but whether, I don't believe, and I did a little bit of research before we came on air, I don't believe that Sydney testified in his own defense. And Tammy did. Go ahead.
That would be the question that I would ask if he testified and sunk his case as bad as she did hers.
Right. It really does make a difference. And, you know, so many times, and I know you've been here, and I think you're coming back here again tomorrow, but so many times we talk about, is the defendant going to testify? Because, you know, that is a key moment. It's a very exciting moment for we who are watching, but it's an important decision in every single trial, isn't it?
It is. And again, I reflect back. We love cameras in the courtroom. We're an advocate for it. But when cameras come in the courtroom, sometimes that psychs out and makes somebody make a decision, too, that the world is watching. I've got to tell my story. And same thing to jurors. Jurors take cases where a camera is in the courtroom a little more seriously. Yeah. And that's probably a difference as well. That's
a really good point. You know, when jurors know that cameras are in, because I think the jurors take their role seriously in general, and they really, I mean, it is a tough job, and I have a lot of respect for juries. But they really, when the cameras are there, you're right, they probably are even more attuned to the duty that they have to fulfill. John, I want to thank you so much for being here with us as we've gone through this case here this afternoon of Tammy Moore. You've been a fabulous analyst of this very interesting case, and we'll see you back here again soon, I'm sure.
It's been
great.
Ladies
and gentlemen, stay tuned for the Daily Debrief with Aaron Keller.